While diversity is usually seen as an ethnic, gender, or income issue, there's this new kind of diversity that only 8% of U.S. companies ever recognize. Today on the Champion Forum podcast, we discuss diverse generations on teams. Welcome back, everyone, to the show. Love having you all back as we are on a mission to lead, inspire, and win. Our guest today needs very little introduction, but for those that may be new to leadership, let me introduce him. Dr. Tim Elmore is the founder and CEO of Growing Leaders, which is an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization that's created to develop emerging leaders. And since founding Growing Leaders, Tim has spoken to more than 500,000 students all over the country. He's taught leadership to Delta, Chick-fil-A, the Home Depot, the John Maxwell Company, Home Bank, and Gold Kist, Inc., among others. He's also taught courses on leadership and mentoring at 9 universities and graduate schools all across the United States. He has shared his insights in more than 30 countries, and his expertise on emerging generations and generational diversity in the workplace has led to some significant media coverage in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes.com, Huffington Post, MSNBC, the Washington Post. He's appeared on CNN Headline News and Fox and Friends. So what an amazing resume, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Jeff, it's great to be with you. We're going to have a fun conversation today. I just bet.
There is no doubt about it. You know, we talked briefly before we hit the record button, and I got to let you know that I'm a huge fan of yours. You've definitely impacted my leadership journey. You've had some amazing mentoring. As the leaders go, so goes the people. And I just appreciate what you're doing. You're definitely hitting some gaps with your books, of course, but you're teaching. And you're getting to the hard places. You know, there's a lot of things that I find, and you know this, Tim, that in leadership that aren't taught well. I think the blocking and tackling, we do a really good job, and it's very important. But boy, you are hitting some areas that, quite frankly, are tough to teach, and a lot of leaders don't have a great handle on it. So we value that about you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I tell you what, I always keep going back to, this is an emotional intelligence issue, you know, connecting with different generations. It's reading our people before we're leading our people, which sounds so cliche, but that's exactly what we got to do. We can't be such in a rush to get to the numbers and the bottom line that we miss the people along the way. And they are from, Jeff, there's as many as 5 generations working together right now, all with slightly different mindsets, sometimes fundamentally different mindsets. So the book that I did is really an encyclopedia to try to help leaders figure out who their people are. Yeah.
Man, it is something too. You know, we hear the old saying of, you manage process, you lead people.
Yes.
But here's what we know. If you're listening, you know this. If you've been in leadership any length of time, no two people are created equal. Generational, cultural, and for the first time in history, as you've mentioned, Tim, we have up to 5 generations that find themselves working alongside our leaders and their peers. And this has caused division among teams. It leaves leaders scratching their head for answers. Yeah. We don't really know what to go. We can't lead everybody the same way. Interactions between people from different generations, man, it can cause a little bit of tension in the workplace, a little bit of challenge. And so you're looking at this, and this can cause a different challenge for leaders maybe than what they're normally used to. And you've clearly defined this, you've identified it, so much so that you wrote a book, A New Kind of Diversity, which is amazing, to assist leaders. So tell us a little bit about the book. What prompted the book, Tim? And for those that are new to the term, what exactly is generational diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's a great place to start. So some people wonder, is this really an issue? Is this really a category? It absolutely is. So the term generation gap is more than 50 years old. John Poppy, Life magazine editor, way back in the 1960s, coined the term generation gap as the baby boomers were the young upstarts coming through the system, and their older parents, their bosses just didn't get those young whippersnappers. Well, now, ironically, the baby boomers are the old, dinosaurs, here under Gen Z, millennials. Who are these kids today? So, Jeff, I had some fun researching for the book, and I tell a couple of stories early in the book that really illustrate why is this a thing. One of the stories is about a college student named Tony who had a part-time job while he attended Ohio University. He worked in a major retail brand paint store, a name that everybody would recognize. And while he was working his part-time job, he started a TikTok account. Of course he did. So while he's on TikTok, he starts posting videos of himself mixing paint colors and so forth, and he goes viral. So when Tony has 1.4 million followers on TikTok, 37 million views, he realizes we could monetize this. We could use this for marketing. We could get in front of a million other people that this paint brand isn't in front of. So Tony puts a slide deck together to make a presentation to management. He doesn't get one executive willing to listen to him. Doesn't get one set of eyeballs looking at one slide. Tony did get something he didn't expect. He got fired.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. He got fired because they were just sure that this young guy was probably doing this on company time, probably disrupting the customers, probably stealing the paint. They had all the wrong assumptions, all the negative assumptions that we do oftentimes. Well, Tony assured them he wasn't doing any of those things, but they let him go. So get this, Tony moves from Ohio to Florida, now has over 2 million followers, and started his own paint store.
Wow.
So while there's many parts to this story we probably don't understand, here's one thing I think I understand. They missed an opportunity, don't you think?
Oh my gosh.
They could have turned 1 million people into perhaps customers, and yet they just had an assumption, a negative assumption about this young generation that they didn't understand. Now, real quick, the other side of the coin is just as true. I talk to HR executives all the time that say, I love onboarding young, recent graduates onto our team. We love the energy they bring, but they're having tough spots in the interview process. Like one HR chief human resource officer recently said she was walking a young man that she was planning to hire around the office, just giving a tour. And he asked her the question straight-faced, when's spring break? And she goes, well, we work all year round here. We actually work all year round, and of course, that was really new to him because he'd never had a full-time job before. It was always academics. And so he goes, well, she finally laid out the expectation, he said, I'm just not an 8-hour-a-day sort of guy. Yeah. So she showed him to the door and very politely said goodbye, but she thought, oh, somebody should have gotten him ready. The classroom didn't get him ready for the workroom. So I could go on and I won't, but all I'm saying is more and more stories pop up from both sides, young and old, veterans and rookies. And I'm thinking, we've got to bridge this gap because the Gen Zers have so much to offer the workplace.
Yeah. And so much to learn as well.
Yeah, no doubt.
When you're telling that story, that hits home to me. Yeah. And I'm aging, but I remember, this is hilarious, Tim. I remember my first real job because I had part-time jobs and so forth. And I worked at restaurants. I was a busboy, but my first big boy job, I remember I started in the fall. And I remember asking my boss, how much, it was like Christmas Eve and we were working a half day. And I said, so when do we return to work? And he said, the day after Christmas. And I looked at him like he was out of his mind.
Yes.
I remember calling my dad and I'm like, hey, this guy he's only giving us Christmas Day off. Yeah. And I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me this? Like, that's a real gut punch, right? Yes.
Absolutely. So you thought you were working for Ebenezer Scrooge or something like that.
Exactly. Meanwhile, this is how everybody does it. So I think we owe it to people to, clarity is kind and making sure people understand and all of that. But I will tell you this, and part of the book talks about this, the biases. There's so many biases. I work with executives. I know you do, Tim. And when I look at these mid-level leaders, I often hear the tenured leaders, the young generation, fill in the blank. The young generation's lazy. Nobody wants to work. And there's all of these biases of which I respond, none of them want to work. They're all lazy. Like, let's talk about this. But I mean, there's some real science here. And, would you say generations are different because of personalities, or where is this chasm, Tim?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll give a real quick headline for listeners to just see that this really is a category. So I tell people very often, it's not so much a science as a social science, but social scientists are real people with real data. Whenever a generational cohort comes through, those people are shaped not only by their age, but by the circumstances or tragedies or experiences they shared as they were formed. So people develop a little bit like wet cement. When wet cement is laid on a sidewalk, you can put your handprint in it on day one because it's wet and soft. You try to do that 6 months later, you can't do that.
Right.
Our neural pathways are very pliable early on. The plasticity is really there early on. But after about 20, 25 years, it's not that we can't change after that, but the neural pathways are a bit hardened, and it's more difficult to change the older we get. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Oh, my, yes.
So you got a baby boomer that says, hey, I'm not changing, buddy. This is how we do it here. And a Gen Zer goes, this is stupid. Why would you do it this way? Look at TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, right.
So I believe it's very easy to stereotype. And you even just brought up, all these kids are lazy or whatever.
Yeah.
I hear all the time. I tell you what, I hear this all the time. Those baby boomers are just dinosaurs, all those Gen Xers are skeptical. Yeah. All those millennials are narcissists, right. All those Gen Zers are fragile snowflakes. We have these terms we've done. Yeah. And I go, no. Of course, there are a few of those in every generation.
Yeah, right.
We would get past the stereotype. In fact, my goal here is not to stereotype, but to understand. I say that several times in the book. The goal is not to stereotype, but to understand. When we do that, Jeff, I'm telling you, we find gold in every single generation that they have to contribute to the team. And it now can be a competitive advantage instead of we're just tolerating each other at work every day.
Yeah. Sounds like an amazing leadership opportunity. Like, as frustrating as it could be, the people that rise to the greatest influence are the people that are figuring this out.
Yeah.
Because there are biases in every generation. I'm sure, if you're listening and you're in college and you're ready to intern for the summer, like, go in with a very open mind, because you may have a boss that has not yet embraced TikTok and has not yet embraced technology like you. And there's a way to bridge the gap. And just as much as it's a leadership responsibility, I think the employee, the team player, has to take some responsibility as well. Now, I have two college kids. Okay. And so maybe this is just for me as a dad, Tim, but how about the youngest members, as we see any vulnerability? Where is the greatest vulnerability? Where do you see it maybe in the most senior and in our youngest members? Can you give us where the red flags might be?
Absolutely. Great question. So just for listeners to get their arms around this issue, the youngest kids that we're measuring today are children, and they're from the alpha generation. So they would be elementary school and younger. They're not a factor yet in consumers and team members and so forth, but they're kids, think about it, that have only known a smartphone. And to be honest with you, think about it. If you're a really young child today, let's say you're 6 years old in the first grade, half your life has been a pandemic.
Yeah, right.
So you've not been socialized the way normal 6-year-olds have been socialized. So their social and emotional skills are behind, not because they're dumb. It's just that they haven't been exposed the way other generations have been. So we're going to have to help them catch up academically and socially and emotionally. Gen Zers, Generation Z, would be the ones following the millennials. They would be the youngest generational cohort in the workplace.
Yeah.
Jeff, their vulnerabilities would be their lack of experience. So think with me. They've been overexposed to information far earlier than they're ready on a tablet, at elementary school, but underexposed to firsthand experiences later than they're ready. So it creates something that I call artificial maturity. It's not derogatory. I don't mean that to sound like an insult. We did this culture. We made the world they're growing up in.
That's true.
But if you're overexposed to information, you can get a little cocky thinking you understand it when you watch 17 YouTube videos on the subject, but you've not really done it maybe. Remember how you described when we return to work the day after Christmas? You know what?
Yeah. You're a monster.
So even you had lack of experience at that point.
For sure.
But today they come in with a high sense of agency because they do feel large and in charge. I'm self-sufficient. I'm asking Google questions I used to ask mom and dad.
Yeah.
But a high sense of anxiety as well. So there's the vulnerability. They may come in looking a little cocky because they know a lot at 22, but they also come in, real mental health issues are more normalized than ever before, at least since I began my career over 40 years ago. Yeah. So one moment they're saying, I don't need you. The next moment they're saying, I desperately need you. And you're going to have to read your people before you lead your people.
I not to put you in a box, but maybe just to get your thoughts on this. I've done a lot of research on this mental stability because obviously I help a lot of companies in the fight for retention. Yeah. And we're always thinking about how do we get ahead of the curve for value, benefits, what will people appreciate? And we're seeing that well-being is number one on the list of things that are important to people. Do you see a generational gap with this? Like, would you say that the boomers are more stable than the younger generation? And if so, why is that? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, great question. So once again, let me first say, I don't want to stereotype anybody. And I know you don't want me to, but I would say, since I'm a baby boomer, I can speak for us, I think, pretty well. When we first started our careers, it was very common for the boss to say, leave your personal problems at the door. You come in here to get your work done. Yep. Today, young employees are hearing, bring your whole self to work, which is emotions and baggage and all kinds. I don't mean to sound cruel. We've all got our baggage. But now it's like, I may have, I need a mental health day, I even just saw a post where Gen Zers were circling around this issue of bare minimum Monday. So I get the bare minimum effort because I had a hard weekend. I got a little lit. I'm not coming in, or I'm coming in and getting the bare minimum. Quiet quitting. It's quiet quitting.
Yeah.
So I feel like a boss or an employer could get really frustrated because we're going, what the heck? Come on.
Yeah, right. I never did that.
Exactly. So here's what I would recommend, and I'm preaching to myself as much as anybody else. I would say employers, sit down and remember a leg you have to stand on. So a leg is an acronym, ALEG. The first letter A is ask. Start by asking questions. Are you okay? Tell me about what just happened or what's going on in your mind right now. That sends a signal, I care about you. Even though you might be saying, I actually want to get your work done right now. If you start with asking questions, that just sends a signal, I care. The letter L in leg, listen. I want to tell rather than ask and listen. But I really think when I listen, they feel heard. And as psychobabble as that may sound, people need to feel heard, especially Gen Z. When I, as a 63-year-old guy, leans in to listen, oh my gosh, it's a game changer for the 20-somethings. The letter E, Jeff, empathize. So I'm working more and more to not only listen so they feel heard, but empathize so they feel understood. Now they feel like, oh my gosh, he gets me, because I hear him saying, so what I hear you saying is this. And then the letter G in leg, guide. Now I have earned my right to offer some input and offer some guidance, like, Josh, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, today we've really got to get this project done. Do you feel like you're going to be able to, but you've leaned in, which causes them to reciprocate. I feel like I earn my right to lead them, even though I got a badge on right now. I've earned my right to lead them because I've connected with them before connect before you correct. Connect before you correct.
That's so good. Tim, that is so good. This, what you're saying is so true as well, because, and the door does swing both ways, but, this is kind of 10xing emotional intelligence, just listening to you speak. There's the blocking and tackling of emotional intelligence, but this is a different level. And I would almost say that it's critical that we don't get this wrong. And
Yes,
there's a
I agree.
lot at risk, and you're seeing it. You're out there, you're teaching it. You're counseling businesses to pull them through this journey.
Yeah.
What's at risk, Tim? What's at risk if we miss this?
I think what's at risk is twofold, and I think both of these are blatantly clear to me. One is we don't tap into the greatest talent that Gen Z has to offer. And I know you work with executives all the time where you want to pull out the best talent, and the war on talent is huge right now.
Yeah.
So because we're off-putting to that young team member, they may say, hey, I'm out of here. I'm entering the portal and I'm going to another team, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they feel that sense of free agency right now. But secondly, I think wherever they land, we don't tap into who they really are. So let me tell a quick story that might illustrate what's at risk here, or what's on the line. In the book, I talk about an Army colonel that is so brilliantly represents the social and emotional intelligence that's needed today. So Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Hughes fought in Iraq with his troop during the second invasion. And he was there when the Allied forces, including the US, were sending over blankets and food and clothes to the displaced Iraqis who were getting out of a town that had just been bombed and going to a safer place. So Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Hughes' job was to find a place to distribute these goods. Well, he thought, I think the best place to do it is probably the local mosque. After all, these people are Muslim, and they would feel they could trust the cleric at that mosque. So he contacts the cleric, and they figure out, yes, we're going to set up tables and distribute these clothes and food and so forth. But think about it with me, Jeff. As he's marching down with his troop, a gun on one shoulder, a package on another, and they're marching toward the mosque. Can you imagine what people are thinking? Yeah. All the locals are thinking, you're about to march down and shoot, and drop bombs on our mosque.
Yeah.
But by the time this troop gets there, it's surrounded by Iraqis. I mean, all the locals with sticks and rocks, and they are yelling and screaming in the local dialect, and they are ready for a street fight. Well, you can imagine, if a street fight breaks out, this is not going to look good on CNN.
Right.
And it's not going to be great for anybody there. In fact, some lives may be lost. So all kinds of things are at stake. Well, I love the brilliance that this leader shows. Probably about 200 or 300 feet out, he realizes what's happening. So he's reading the situation. He orders his troops to stop. Take packages, rifles, stop. So they halt. They don't get any closer. He then requests his troops to set down the package and point their gun toward the ground. Then he orders his soldiers to take a knee, which is the most vulnerable position in that. I mean, the other folks have rocks and sticks. Now you're pretty vulnerable.
Yeah.
Then he says, I want you to look up at these people in front of this mosque and smile.
Wow.
Well, the moment they are guns down, packages down, I'm on a knee and I'm smiling at you. It's a game changer.
Yeah.
People start dropping their sticks and their rocks. Some start smiling back. And that gave Hughes time enough to grab somebody that spoke the local language to explain, we're here to help you, not harm you. Disaster averted.
Wow.
I say, I don't think he read that on page 57 in an Army manual.
Right.
I think this guy was brilliant. And he read
Yeah.
the situation and thought, I know what I need to do. And I'm getting choked up here because I'm thinking, employers have to get this right. We can't just say, bottom line, bottom line, bottom line. We may lose the people that we love and serve with because we're so paying attention to the wrong thing right now. If we win them at the heart level, we will win the bottom line. But I think we got to pay attention to the people first.
Yeah. And this I share your passion, Tim. This transcends key performance indicators and business results, because at the end of the day, as leaders, we have been called to a role.
Yes.
And we literally have the opportunity to change somebody's life. Like, imagine I don't have that. His name was Ed, my first boss. And imagine if Ed wasn't, empathetic and explaining and took this mentoring to say, hey, look, maybe nobody's ever explained this. Instead of being critical and saying, see, these kids, all they want is more time off and all they want is quiet quitting and all. he was empathetic to kind of explain how things were.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's shaped leaders like Ed and many beyond that have shaped who I've become. So look, I mean, suit yourself, do this because it makes good business sense.
Yeah.
But the reality too is, as leaders, we're shaping people. And it's, I know it's cliche, but it's so true that when we take care of the people, they will take care of the business. And putting ourselves in their shoes, being aware of our surroundings, that story is so beautiful because it gets back to the saying of make huge impact and use words if you must.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
there's something there that we can have that empathetic approach, both young to old, old to young, and everything in between, because there is this thing called the human language
Yes.
that we got to have this belief that everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to get better. And somewhere in there is that. And again, you have a front row seat to this. So what are your recommendations? Besides the obvious, read the book, study the book. What do you recommend organizations do to start truly being intentional about connecting these 5 generations in the workplace?
Yeah. Great question. Loaded question, as you all know, Jeff.
Yes.
So the first thing was an idea that popped in my head as you were talking just now. I do myself some good as a leader when I imagine all of my paid staff are volunteers. Now, I'm not the only one that's ever said that, but think about it. If I treat them like volunteers, they're not. They're making good money and they got a 401k and blah, 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 blah. But I tend to lead to relationship, not demands.
Yeah.
I lean into Melissa or Andrew or Cam, on my team, and I'm listening almost in a pastoral sort of way, where I'm winning them at the heart level. There's that phrase again. So yes, they're paid staff, and yes, they ought to do it because they're getting paid money. I get it. But if I treat them that way, oh my gosh, I get more than I'm stopping at 5 o'clock, boss, because I love you back. So they tend to reciprocate. People practice the mirror effect. They will mirror back what we lead with. And if I lead with care and concern, like you just said, they're gonna care and concern for the work back. So that'd be number one. Lead them as if they're volunteers. Number two, we have begun something at Growing Leaders called reverse mentoring. Jack Welch actually came up with this term 30 years ago. But reverse mentoring is when you pair up team members, one a seasoned veteran and the other a rookie or a young team member, young and old.
Sure.
When you get them together, you first ask them to swap stories. You can always find common ground when you swap stories with young and old.
Yeah.
But then they become mentorns. So mentors and interns, but both. So the older might share, here's how to succeed at this company. I bet I know some things that you don't. But then that old mentor takes off that hat, puts on the mentee hat, and says, could you share some technology with me that I don't get? I don't even know how to do a keynote slide, or I don't even know how to do that TikTok thing or whatever. I don't know. But there are categorical insights that they have that we don't, and we have that they don't. So it's tapping into the silos that we've each been in. And now we're not in an echo chamber. We're in a broad room with full of insight. So reverse mentoring has been a game changer. Jeff, I meet with Andrew every week, who's 30 years younger than me. I meet with Cam, who's 40 years younger than me. Believe it or not, I'm an old guy here. But every
you look great.
Well, thank you. But every time I teach and I learn. Every time I teach and I learn. So that's a posture that I know everybody gets, but we just got to check our ego and our logo at the door. Just sit down, human to human, and learn from them.
That's so impactful, because sometimes I believe that the more senior the leader is, the more bravado they bring. And what can you teach me? And I'm not even saying that you're arrogant if you're listening, but to be self-aware and maybe open your mind a little bit more to say, what can I extract? What can I learn? How can I be served by them? And how can I serve them? Because there is so much to learn. And I do think we go straight towards sometimes, hey, if you're young, you got to be great at technology, right? And that's what we really need. I made fun of myself even early in the show by saying I'm only good at 2 things. Thank God for Brad. He does amazing things in the studio. But it is true that whether it's technology or anything, their experiences are different. And there's a lot that I think we can learn. And I think it does make our companies, I mean, I would go as much to say, Tim, it gives us a competitive advantage. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I dug up some data that might be really helpful to the point you just made. So we asked from each generational cohort, all 5 generations that are in the workplace, we asked the question, what do you want most from the other generations when they interface with you? Well, we got a myriad of answers, you can imagine. Gen Z wanted this, boomers wanted that. But there were 3 answers that came up from every one of the generations that they want from the other. Here are the 3 qualities. Number 1 is humility. Isn't that interesting? So old and young said, would you approach me with humility? Which I think communicates, I realize I got more to learn. I realize I don't know everything. And by the way, both old and young can come to an interaction thinking they know everything.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. The second one is the word respect. Now, that's an old-fashioned word. Thank you, Aretha Franklin. But when I approach with respect, rather than demand, you got to earn my respect. That's what my generation usually says. You got to earn my respect. And when you do, I'll respect you. What if you began with belief? What if you began respecting Cam at 22 when he walks into the building? Oh my gosh, they're going to respect you. They're going to reciprocate. So humility, respect. Number 3 was so interesting. Curiosity. Every one of the generations said, I wish you would approach me with a curious spirit, just hungry and curious. What might I learn from you, 22-year-old or 35-year-old or 51-year-old or 65-year-old? Oh my gosh. So when we started marketing the book, Jeff, this new book, New Kind of Diversity, I asked each generational cohort, how would you profile this book to your generation to sell it? How would you profile it? Everyone was different. I need this encyclopedia for different reasons.
Yes.
So much fun. But I had to check my ego at the door,
right,
and learn. So it was a lot of fun.
Those are great practical tips. And these are practical things the leaders that are listening could give yourself a scorecard here. Like, how would you grade yourself? And the more honest and transparent you are, the better. And fill in those blanks. Humility, respect, curiosity really stood out to me, Tim, because it's like, what do you have that I don't have that maybe I need and I don't even know it? Yeah. And I think it's so valuable, as you were telling the story about that and, how, coming into work and, I'm not giving my best on Monday and all of this. And these 3 things, it made me think recently in my local newspaper, there was a story of a guy that worked his entire career and never missed a day's work.
Wow.
And it made headlines as it should. Like I'm thinking to myself, wow. And this guy's at retirement age. So, he's a boomer and he goes his whole life. The story goes on to say his dad did the exact same thing.
Oh my gosh.
Worked his whole career. I'm sharing this story. I'm not going to reveal the name with a very young person. This is hilarious. And their response was, why would anybody ever do that?
Oh my gosh.
Why would anybody ever do that? And I'm like, okay, here's the gap. Here it is, right? Yeah. How do I approach that? Because if I don't approach this the right way, and this isn't a teaching moment, here's this generational thing, and we got to work through that. And I'd love, and this is outside of business, maybe this is more of a selfish personal question, Tim, but have you incorporated this into your home? You have children, there's a lot going on in the Elmore house as there is the Hancher house.
Yep.
What do you say to the parents out there with this?
Yeah, well, I do think there's much to learn. In fact, I began to see this vividly illustrated during 2020. So we were all in quarantine, COVID-19 had broken out. And do you remember the protests that year?
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter. We looked across the country and really the world, and it was millions, not thousands, marching, mostly younger generation, not all, but mostly. And I began to talk to my own 2 kids. Bethany's 34, Jonathan's 30. So they're well into their careers and doing well, but very different mindset. Now, let me start by saying, of course, I believe Black Lives Matter. Absolutely. All races, all minorities, the marginalized, we need to take care of them. Yeah. But different viewpoint. So I wrote a blog when the protests started breaking out. And in Atlanta, where I live, there was some violence. So I thought I ought to do a blog post on how to protest effectively.
Wow.
Okay. So I'm a baby boomer. I remember the protests in the 60s. I sure
Sure.
do.
Sure.
So I'm going to share some insights, this old man here, on how to protest efficiently.
Yeah.
So I showed it to my daughter and she read it. And after we connected a day or two later, and I said, Bethany, what'd you think? She was quiet because she wanted to be respectful to her father. And I finally pulled it out of her. And Jeff, here's what she said. Dad, I just don't know if we need one more older white guy to tell us how to behave. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're right. And I never posted. I never put it on.
Wow.
Now, did I think it was a good one? I thought it was good.
Of
But I
course.
just realized those younger generation kids are going, well, let me just be honest with listeners. Check this out. The younger generation, with some exceptions, believes the older has let injustice go on way too long.
Mhm.
How could you let this stuff continue to happen?
Mhm.
And Jeff, there's a general distrust in traditional institutions,
Yeah.
corporate America, government, religious institutions,
Sure.
healthcare. I mean, Gen Z looks, and by and large, I don't trust you.
Yeah.
So again, just knowing that informs my leadership. I need to not begin with, no, of course, I'm going to tell you what to do here, Bob.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with, boy, I know we've messed up a little bit, haven't we? So I want to start with, and by the way, do you know what the average age is of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.? It's old.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
80 years, 78, 80, 82.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
president's 80. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, if you just do a run, one of my recent posts, I listed the ages, and then I listed the ages of the early government leaders, Jefferson, Franklin. It was so young.
It's true.
I mean, Jefferson, you know this. So I'm just thinking, how come we turned the young people loose in the beginning, and now we're holding on to power when the young are looking at us and say, would you please let go and help us make it right? You
Wow.
be our mentors, not our managers. I know I'm on my soapbox now. But
No, that's very insightful.
Yeah.
That's very thought-provoking, because I mean, we're talking about the government of the United
right.
States of America.
Yeah.
Like at minimum, we should be looking inside our companies and asking ourselves, are we doing succession planning right?
Yeah.
Are we doing this the right way? Are we
Yeah.
doing our customers and our employees a disservice by not moving faster on this?
Yeah.
And it's, man, what a fascinating subject, Tim. And I value what you're putting out there. This is going to help a lot of people. There's no question about it. If you have a couple more minutes, I'd love to do somewhat of a speed round, because I got to tell you, leaders, listeners, do yourself a favor and go follow Tim. Go look at his work. And Tim, I'm a student of your work, but I mean, no disrespect with what I'm about to say. I'm a bigger fan of who you are than what you've done. I've read some of your stories of breakthrough, risk, challenge. So you've had some challenges along the way. And I think we can learn from this. So I just have a couple of questions that I think we can glean from. If you had to look back and think about your journey, what's the biggest risk that you took that had the biggest payoff?
Oh, wow. Well, the first answer that comes to my mind is probably starting Growing Leaders. So you and I were talking in the pre-minutes we had together. I worked for Dr. John C. Maxwell for 20 years. My gosh, he mentored me right out of college. I always tell people, if I don't do a good job, it's my own fault, because I had some great mentors in my life.
Right.
When I started Growing Leaders 20 years after I got out of college, I left a very secure, well-paying, John took such good care of me, you can imagine, role, and started this thing, this gig. Now, I think John thought it might be a side hustle, and never be more, but Growing Leaders began to take off. But what I was wanting to do was do what John did for business leaders for the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So he teaches the 21 laws of leadership. We teach with images. So young team members are learning a timeless principle with the power of an image or a picture, and pictures are worth 1,000 words. So we have employee engagement. Anyway, all that to say, over the last 20 years, we have just grown. And I was just at the NFL Combine talking to all the NFL teams about their youngest rookies coming in that they're about to draft. And I couldn't believe I was in the room. with these, with Kansas City Chiefs and the, Eagles and so forth,
Wow.
the Bills. But I tell you why I was there. They said, Tim, you got one category down. You can help us understand this young team member that we have got to onboard because he's a great running back. And we've got to have this guy, buy into the team. So anyway, I would say the biggest payoff, but the greatest risk that I didn't even know if I could put food on the table in 2003 was, oh my gosh, thank you, Lord.
Wow.
It's been so fun. And of course, John Maxwell, to his credit, was our biggest fan. We're a nonprofit. He wrote the first check to us, and he still writes big checks. And he's like an uncle, I'm like a nephew. He's like an uncle, and he just tells me good job, and I go on another year. So I would say that's my answer to that question.
Talk about a selfless leader in John Maxwell.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you leaving left a big gap, but he was sowing you into the world.
Yeah, he's so secure. He wants to release people and turn them loose to read. And so every time I meet with John, I look him in the eye and I say, John, you have stock in every leader that I have trained because you put your fingerprints on me. And and he smiles and goes, I know.
Wow.
So it's fun.
I mean, I'm not going to go far with this, but I'll just leave it at this and say, I wish more organizations were like that.
Yeah, I do too.
Where they release people, they've groomed people, they've empowered people to go into the world and make a difference. And I know the risk, Tim. Like I've been there. You're obviously way further ahead than I am, which is why I love your journey and I love your story. And sometimes the risk does pay off.
Yeah.
You've been around the greats. I mean, you've ate with the greats. You've walked and talked with the greats. You've traveled with the greats. What's the best leadership advice that you personally have ever received?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I want to give something that's not pithy and cliche so much, Jeff. Well, I'll tell you what, my answer might sound cliche, but I always go back to when that question's asked, lead yourself first before you try to lead anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, I jumped into my career pretty early. John gave me opportunities. I was speaking to big audiences at 17 years old, way before I should have. And so I got swept up into being on the stage because my gift threw me on the stage, but I'm not sure if my character was ready for that. You follow what I'm saying?
Oh my.
So the doing was great, man. Great speaker, great stories. But I remember about 7 and 8 years into my career thinking, oh my gosh, am I a fake?
Mm-hmm.
Am I a poser? Mm-hmm. So I remember taking some time and just focusing, even though I stayed in my job, focusing on growing me on the inside so that my gift and my character were both the same size. So I would say, listeners, as silly as it sounds, keep leading you before you try to lead anybody else.
Yeah, that's a house of cards.
Yeah, it is.
You can't give what you don't have.
Yeah, and right.
This painted rust mentality, it doesn't last.
It's
right?
So true.
It doesn't last. It out.
Yeah,
it's good. Do. That's great feedback. The last one I have, if somebody granted you access to a billboard that the entire world could see, what do you write on it? What would you want them to know?
Oh my gosh. I wish you would have warned me about this question.
Sorry, Tim. I'm trying to get you in the moment.
Yes, you are. Oh my gosh. Well, can I have 17 billboards? I'm going to get philosophical on you. I would write something short enough to be on a billboard, but it would have something to say. You will influence others based on your sense of identity yourself. So I think we all look outward and we want to be an influencer on social media. We want to have a tribe, followers, tweets, retweets, shares, views.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty hollow unless I realize I can't just make this stuff up. So here's one of our images. Let me give 2 quick images that will answer my question. One is the starving baker. I think so many leaders are starving bakers. We're spending so much time baking bread for others. We forget to eat and starve ourselves. So I've got to feed myself before I feed anybody else. I got to grow myself before I grow anybody else. So my identity is going to have everything to do with how well I lead. Do I go into that interaction secure in who I am? I'm emotionally secure. My sense of identity is clear. So starving baker. The other one is the very first image in course number 1 of our habitudes. It's called the iceberg. You've seen a picture of an iceberg where you see the
Sure.
tip above the water and then that massive amount that lies below the waterline. We say the tip of the iceberg represents your skills. People can see it.
Wow.
But that massive amount below the waterline represents your character. And it's what's below the surface that sinks the ship. So we put a lot of stock in what we appear to be, what we look like, what people can see. I think 90% of our influence lies in qualities beneath the surface. So I got to lead myself before I lead anybody else. I got to feed myself before I feed anybody else. As basic as that sounds, wouldn't you love every young employee to start with that?
Man,
Don't pass behind the back, learn to pass, dribble, and shoot.
yes.
Do that first. And that's what this is.
Yes. Identity, your identity. This is so big too, because I find so many people, even executives, battle this imposter syndrome and fake it till you make it. And am I qualified enough? If you're genuinely who you are, you're going to attract the right people to your personal brand.
Yes. Yeah.
And otherwise it's miserable. It really is. It's a lonely place.
Yeah. Well, and you put your head on the pillow at night and you go, I don't even like who I just stared at in the mirror tonight. It's right. It's just not worth it. Yeah.
Man, Tim, you have given us some great deposits, and I truly value you being with us today. If our listeners are looking to improve with generational leadership, obviously we have the book, but what other tools do you have that maybe they could access? I know you have an assessment as well.
Yeah. Let me talk about the assessment. So it's absolutely free. If people wanted to go to newdiversitybook.com, it'll take you to a free assessment. So I love this. We call this assessment your GQ, your generational quotient. So I know it's pithy. But,
I love it.
But you can see, I don't connect with Gen Zers, but I do well with Gen X and Boomers, or I do well with this one, but not with that one. 41 questions, free assessment. You'll get a report and you can see how you're doing. And then, of course, you can get the book there as well. But that assessment might be a great place to start. And then our images that we teach with, habitudes, you can find them at growingleaders.com. And we'd love people, if we can be helpful, to find us there, and please interact. It'd be fun.
We would be happy to do it. And Tim, a heartfelt thank you. Really appreciate you investing time. You could have been a lot of places this last several minutes, and you chose to be here and chose to make deposits into our listeners. So we appreciate it. So if you all, as listeners, you want to learn more about Tim, as well as get some challenging activities, some application tools from each episode, make sure you go to our homepage, jeffhancher.com, register to have these show notes delivered directly to your inbox free of charge. We will have all of Tim's credentials. We'll have a link to the assessment, his homepage, and even a link to his most recent book that you can touch base on to make sure that you are leading the 5 generations in the workplace. And until next time, keep leading well, and never forget that you all have been set up to be champions in this life.